This is Right to Life Radio with John Girardi on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production of Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
It's the first Saturday of the month, and as we do every first Saturday of the month on Right to Life Radio, we are featuring our Stories from the Sidewalk, where we talk about the awesome stuff that's happening at the Right to Life of Central California Outreach Center. And joining me, as we do every first Saturday to talk about it, is Linda Teliha. Welcome, Linda, and thanks for coming back on.
I love coming on because I love it when I get to talk about good things, and since something really great happened today.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the nice things is that often with a pro-life show, talking about stuff that's happening around the country, it can get a lot of bad news. And it's nice to have you on to talk about hopeful and good things that happen. So a lot of stuff happened over the course of this week with our outreach center, which is, again, located on Fulton Street, right next to the main Planned Parenthood clinic. It's sort of the center for our direct engagement with women going into and out of Planned Parenthood. So tell us a little bit about what's been going on out there and about some of the hopeful things that have been happening this week.
Okay. First of all, I was just sort of thinking about this, about how I work with mostly guys now, and
yeah, I know.
I tried to get away with, can I come in here with not out brushing my hair?
Well, I mean, it's chiefly a radio show, so no one really cares that much. But it is, I guess, it is on YouTube. You can, for those of you listening, if you want to watch the show on YouTube, youtube.com/righttolifeca. Linda looks very nice.
Thought
for those
I
in the
looked
radio
fine until a couple people like, do you have a comb?
Do you have a comb? Oh, Jordan. All right. Well, we'll have to talk that through. But here you are. Anyway.
No, so I haven't did my hair. Okay.
Okay. You're looking good. You're looking good, Linda. All right.
Anyway, so I'm in a really good mood because it really was a great day. It's been a great week.
Yeah.
And the ironic thing is that I was having a conversation with my coworker, George, and we were talking about hope and how easy it is to lose hope out there.
Yeah.
Because no matter how many great stories I have, there's so many that are not that great.
Well, sure. And the batting average, if you want to put it in those numbers, I mean, the batting average seems low. And it's a thing where we know from the outset going in rationally that, okay, a certain number of people are going to listen to you and make the right decision. A certain number of people are just not going to listen to you. And a certain number of people are going to make the right decision without you ever knowing about it.
Yeah.
And so even a lot of the successes are things you're never going to know about. And most of what you're going to face is people either not listening to you or just ignoring you.
Right.
So, and that's kind of I definitely we can see how that's a difficult reality. And I know you and George have at different times have sort of expressed the difficulty of struggling with that.
It can be.
Yeah.
But part of it is also I'm so competitive and we're all human. So it's easy to, when someone doesn't quote unquote listen to you or you don't think that they do, to consider it a fail or a lose.
Sure.
And so one of the things I was talking about is that none of us are God.
No.
And you can't really take it personal.
Sure. And it's also a thing of, it is ultimately that person's decision. And if that person, I mean, there's the old Mother Teresa quote that it gets kind of trite, but it's, that we're not called to be successful. We're called to be faithful. And that's kind of how I've always viewed the importance of this mission, is that we should be there and we should be faithful, and it's not necessarily about success.
Winning.
But
hard.
At the very least, it is nice when fidelity is rewarded with success. So I mean, maybe talk about some of I know we've had sort of two different instances over the course of this week where
I was just going to end that with
people.
The fact that the faithful part and the fact that Satan loves hopelessness.
Well, sure. Yeah.
He loves that we can feel failure. And so that's something you just have to be aware of. And sometimes when you like, oh, that's right, then you kind of kick it in and get a little new spirit, a new breath. So today we got a little new spirit. And it's not just today, but a couple days ago. A couple days ago, we had a couple leaving the clinic, and I did one of my things where I was starting to feel frustrated, and I just poked my head in and I said, hey, how's it going?
Mm-hmm.
Are you here to have an abortion?
Yeah.
I don't know it's why I do that sometimes.
A great conversation started. But anyway.
And she was like, yeah, I was. And I said, and you're not now, right? And she was like, well, I go, is that an ultrasound picture? And she said, yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, so we're done. You're not coming back, are you? And she's like, I'm just so scared.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. I mean, we're all scared. Doesn't matter if you're married and this is your 7th kid. It's just, that's part of the deal.
Right.
And I can totally understand that. And we talked for a while and then we exchanged phone numbers. And so as of right now, all that I know is that she is turning the corner to choose life.
Right.
She's young.
Mm-hmm.
She's only 19. And so that probably makes it a lot more scary.
Sure.
I know that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but her man was, when I asked him, he's like, yeah,
I want to keep it.
I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Good.
I'm here for it. So there was that. And as this often happens, even in the moms where we've had reunions with, we'll have the initial contact and then I don't hear anything for months.
Sure.
And then for some reason, I'll just reach out just to check. Because sometimes I don't even really want to because I just want to hope they just did.
Yeah.
And I don't want someone to say, oh, too bad for you. I didn't.
Right,
But,
right.
So that's what's happened is I can tell she's reading my texts.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't heard from her. And
Sure.
except for our last, we had a string of texts like that day and then maybe the day after. But anyway, so there's that one.
Yeah, and you can see, I mean, like, you know, that's sort of the nature of how we're doing this is that we try to offer resources, we try to offer help, but you know, it's up to them. If they want to continue a relationship and continue working with us, that's awesome. And if they feel they've got it in hand,
right,
that's also great too. It's been nice to see how many of our supporters have been willing to go above and beyond and get gifts and blankets and diapers and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, that's and that must be one of the difficulties of the work of you want to provide this help, but maybe this is just something they don't want to keep revisiting,
right,
and don't want to keep talking about. Yeah,
definitely that. And then, for us, I don't know whether this happens for men, but for women, you're like, oh, well, what if I tell her this too? Well, I forgot to tell her about that. And so maybe if I just tell her other things, she'll feel better and
sure.
Stuff like that. But anyway, so that was her. And then today, George happened to notice someone who looked like they were just struggling, and he just sort of pointed to her and called me over. So I just walked up and I said, hey, are you okay? And she's like, not really.
Mm-hmm.
She was crying. And I said, would you like to come in and talk?
Yeah.
We have a little room over here, and you talk about whatever you want. I'm not here to make any decision for you. If you want to vent or we could at least just look at all your options.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And so we walked over, and I think we were in the building for an hour and a half.
Oh, awesome.
And the hard thing about doing this is there's a certain point where I run out of gas.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So what I ended up doing was dialing up one of our volunteers and saying, hey, do you want to FaceTime with this person? Because a lot of times it might help a little because, somebody else is closer to their age.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't feel like I'm 55.
Yeah. So,
but I obviously am not going to have a baby.
Right, exactly. And having someone who's you're dealing with a 19-year-old who's scared that maybe they need another 19-year-old. Maybe they do need
I've had my girls say enough time, you just don't understand.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
Yeah, because I forgot.
Yeah.
I was a girl.
Exactly.
And so this person was actually a little bit older, and she just was in a situation with a lot of strife, and she didn't really want to have an abortion. Most don't.
Yeah.
But it was that same old thing. How am I going to face everyone?
Yeah.
What am I going to do?
That seems to be, I mean, the more we've had the Outreach Center and the more interactions you guys have had, I mean, there just seems to be the recurring, like, it's a choice of hopelessness.
Yeah.
It's a choice of it's not ever a choice of, it's not ever a choice of like, oh boy, I'm excited to, this is an empowering thing for me. No, it's always the fruit of something went wrong and I don't feel like I have the resources to make a better choice.
Right.
So this is the worst, this is all I can do. And there's just a total lack of freedom there. There's a lack of all these choice, really. I mean, that's the other as much as the stupid euphemism of choice is thrown out all the time. These are people who feel like they have no options, and that's why they're doing it.
I think she knew she had options, but so she was actually on birth control.
But the options are super difficult.
Yeah. She's like, okay, I was responsible. You know, I'm on birth control, but this is timing, all about timing, blah, blah, blah. And so we just started talking and just pointing out the miracles of the day, of, you know, meeting. We actually know someone in common. And just all these little things that were coming up. And so I was able to give her a little bit of an option, which was what they really need is time.
Yeah.
I just said, hey, you know, you're on birth control, so who knows, quote unquote, maybe you just need another week to take another test. And when you do, go over to Crisis Pregnancy Center or
Pregnancy Care Center.
Yeah. And because you need to know that the Planned Parenthood sells abortion.
Right.
I mean, that's what they do. They do some healthcare, but they can't stay open without selling abortions.
Yeah.
And that's what they do. So you come back.
Yeah, and that's it's also just the basic economics of how a plan. And as I've been working to open our Obria clinic, I see much more clearly now
why they have to
do abortions, because like, look, our clinic, like, I'm really excited about our clinic. I think our clinic's great. It's going to be providing all this healthcare. Our clinic's not going to make money, and the chief reason why our clinic. Now, obviously, there are a lot of services that Planned Parenthood's providing that we're not, and that we provide and that Planned Parenthood's not. But the chief reason why our clinic's not going to make money and Planned Parenthood makes money is because of one thing and one thing only. It's abortions. Yeah, abortion is the key thing that makes the whole Planned Parenthood business model make sense. So, of course, that's the funnel towards which they're going to direct all of their lower-income patients who show up pregnant and in a bad spot. They're not going to go on and on about, oh, here are adoption resources. Oh, you can really do this. Believe in yourself. Like,
so I do, right while you're saying that, I want to clarify that I do not believe that everyone working at Planned Parenthood has some ulterior evil motive.
No.
I really don't. I think people get stuck in situations or they've been in a situation they feel like they're doing something for the greater good. I don't think it's a personal thing, but it is a corporate thing. For lack of a better way to say it.
Yeah, and 100%. Yeah, it's not necessarily an indictment of individual people that they're purely just money grubbing, but when the whole that's just the structure that the whole clinic operates around. Like your list of suggestions for your patients, your when this becomes normative and this is what you really function to do. I mean, there are other places that do all the other kinds of services Planned Parenthood does. That's the only game in town when it comes to abortion. That's the sine qua non for their existence. So, so that is...
Well, and we're all human. We're driven... Most people are driven by money for whichever reason, for power or for taking care of your family. A lot of the people that work there, they have to take care of their family, and so they justify it in their mind. And then there's a business plan of, this is how we stay open.
Right.
You got to get the numbers.
Right.
And so they're like, well, and I just don't believe that there's everyone in there saying, this is the right thing to do. They're just saying,
no, they've fallen.
Not the wrong thing.
I think it's a thing where you fall into a situation where you've been hired to do something, and then you do the work afterwards of rationalizing the decisions that you have already made, and whether the lingering guilt of it, whether you acknowledge it at all, or you just try to suppress it with slogans or bad arguments, rationalizations, whatever. And that's why I think, we've never taken the approach of, telling abortion, oh, you're all going to burn in hell. We've always tried to be kind to them. And I think the approach of like Abby Johnson's group, and then there were none, which tries to provide resources to people who work in the abortion industry. I think that's totally the right approach because, people are human and people make mistakes, including mistakes of where they decide to work. Anyway, Linda, thanks so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and as always, every first Saturday of the month, our Stories from the Sidewalk segment. You can learn more about our Outreach Center work by going to rtlcc.org and get in touch with us if you ever want to volunteer out there with Linda. All right, when we come back, the Biden administration is introducing its first fiscal year budget. and it has no protections against abortion funding. That's next on Right to Life Radio. Life Radio. Thank you all so much for tuning in. All right, we're going to talk about the Hyde Amendment. But before we get to that, before we get to the Hyde Amendment, there's this story. It's a news story. It's a news story because I guess Twitter has decided that it is a news story. Some of you may have seen it earlier this week because Twitter has mandated that it be in everyone's trending thing. Actually, so Twitter has this very sneaky thing. It's their what's new thing, which is different from trending. So if it was purely just Twitter used to be interesting because you could see what was trending on Twitter, what people were actually talking about, the kinds of topics or hashtags that people were using. And you could see what were the most talked about items on Twitter. And Twitter being kind of a slice of America and large numbers of Americans using it, it would be sort of a useful tool for sort of seeing what was going on and interesting. But now Twitter has sort of changed things around such that they kind of promote things and make sure that things are talked about. And Hillary Clinton retweeted a video of some girl from Texas who was a high school valedictorian giving a speech where she apparently ditched her pre-approved speech to instead talk about Texas's abortion law. Texas passed a law banning abortions after fetal heartbeat can be detected. Texas is one of a number of states to have passed such a law. And this girl is being heralded for her bravery. And Hillary Clinton, retweeted her to say, wow, this young lady was so brave. And it's a story that has a lot of sort of layers to it. One is the way that the media treats these kinds of stories. I'm sure that no one would be talking about how brave a student is who, deviated from the script and instead gave an impassioned anti-abortion speech for his or her valedictorian address. It would be, wow, way to distract from the actual graduates themselves, way to put the focus on yourself. This is blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can just see all the ways in which the media would cover it, or just simply choose not to cover it. It was, well, is that really news? Just one random kid at a random high school graduation decided to say something. The way it will get covered is obviously 180 degrees different depending on the subject matter. But it's also this notion of bravery. There is very little, I mean, maybe in Texas it's a little braver than it is in other parts of the country, but the dominant forces in our culture, in media, in politics, in academia, everywhere, are going to view what this girl did with approval and admiration, because most of those dominant powers in our society are themselves very pro-choice. They just are. So the notion that what she was doing was, quote, brave, listen, what's brave about it? I mean, what's the high school going to do? Not let her graduate? She was the valedictorian. She's already graduated by that point. So there's no repercussions from her high school. She's probably already accepted to college at this point. If anything, it makes you look more attractive in your college admissions. You get to point to the YouTube video for the rest of your life as, oh, yes, I gave an impassioned anti-abortion speech. And employers will have to say, oh, well, how brave of you. Law school, when you apply for law school, when you apply for med school, whatever, oh, how brave of you to have done this. The dominant cultural powers of our time are all pro-choice. Again, in media, in academia, in all of these fields. I mean, to a certain extent, it takes some bravery and some guts for anyone to stand in front of a crowd of people, and it takes some bravery and some guts to stand in front of a crowd of people and address any controversial topic, I'm sure. But you know what? But it would have been a heck of a lot braver, I'd say, for someone to have stood up and said, hey, you know what? Abortion's wrong. I want to talk about how the state of Texas passed this law and what a great thing it is that we're recognizing the human rights of unborn children at earlier and earlier ages, and I hope to find a day where we have enough compassion as a society not to have to choose abortion and blah, 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 blah. You try and do that and see what happens. You do that and see if CNN has a little glowing video segment about you. You do that and see if anyone retweets you as being some brave, heroic, someone other than a pro-life celebrity or lifenews.org or something like that. Of course not. And that's why I find the way that the media covers this, so hypocritical and kind of gross. Because, how brave of this person to speak on a topic of public importance. No way they'd be covering it that favorably if it was a pro-life kid. All right, when we come back this time, I promise, for real this time, we'll talk about the new Biden budget, which has no Hyde Amendment protection language. That is next on Right to Life Radio. All right. One of the big items of pro-life news, I could probably talk about the Dobbs case till I'm blue in the face. This is the Supreme Court case that the court announced they were going to take a couple weeks ago. This is going to be the challenge to Planned Parenthood. And if you want to watch some material on it, we are posting our Right to Life Classroom series. So if you go to youtube.com/RightToLifeCA, not only can you watch this episode of Right to Life Radio, but the first installment in our little series of videos where we're going to be talking about the Dobbs case. So if you want a short, quick explanation of it, go to youtube.com/RightToLifeCA. So I could talk about that till I'm blue in the face, but I think the next big piece of pro-life news that is of great import is the upcoming federal budget that President Biden has introduced to Congress. This is a $6 trillion budget, which is more money than I think I can possibly fathom. But maybe the defining feature of this budget for our purposes is that it does not include so-called Hyde Amendment language. And it's the first federal budget to be introduced to Congress that does not include such language. So let me kind of explain what that means and why it's incredibly harmful and why we should be very deeply afraid. So the federal budget, obviously this is the bill that's passed for funding most of the aspects of the federal government throughout the course of the year. After Roe v. Wade was passed, various judicial decisions were interpreted its effects, and abortion being sort of viewed as a healthcare procedure. One of its effects was that any healthcare programs, any federal spending for healthcare, would necessarily have to fund abortion as a healthcare service. So to prevent that from happening, because Congress realized that was happening, and even liberal members of Congress who supported abortion rights were of the opinion, at least this is back in 1976 or so, were of the opinion that the federal government should not pay for abortion. You had Democrats like Ted Kennedy, like Joe Biden, who believed that while we should protect a legal right to have an abortion, that this is not something that the federal taxpayer needs to fund. And so a compromise was championed by, well, not a compromise, basically a legislative fix to this was championed by the late Congressman Henry Hyde. Congressman Hyde was a longtime pro-life stalwart, and he introduced this rider, this set of bill language that would get attached to the federal budget every year and to lots of other kinds of federal spending bills, called the Hyde Amendment, named after him. A lot of little chunks of legislative language are named after the senator or the member of the House who originally drafted them. And so the Hyde Amendment basically cut off any federal funding to directly pay for abortion through federal healthcare programs. And the chief thing that this impacts is the Medicaid program. So Medicaid is a federally funded health insurance program that is eligible to people who are within a certain income threshold in California. And each state has its own version of Medicaid. It receives some federal funding and some state funding. So in California, we have Medi-Cal. And the federal dollars through Medicaid cannot pay for abortion. Now, a lot of states remedy this, if you view this as a problem, anyway, which I don't. They remedy this by having a purely state dollar stream of funding where the money from the state pays for the abortion. So in California, if you're on Medi-Cal, you can get a Medi-Cal funded abortion, but there are no federal dollars being used to pay for that abortion. It's all state taxpayer dollars. It's all state money that is used to pay for that abortion. Nevertheless, the Hyde Amendment has been an enormously effective tool to lessen the incidence of abortion. It's kind of just basic economics and basic ways in which human beings react to different kinds of financial incentives. If you make something free, if you pay for something, people are more likely to take advantage of it. If it is subsidized and funded by the government, then people are more likely to take advantage of it and to think that it is good. And so the pro-life researcher and statistician, Dr. Michael New, who's a professor at the Catholic University of America in the business school, he's actually done a lot of research on the topic of the Hyde Amendment and what its impact has been on the nation as far as number of abortions. And the Hyde Amendment has probably resulted in something like 2 million children not being aborted who would otherwise have been aborted. That's according to his estimates based on just the ways in which additional money and additional funding incentivize people to have abortions and make more money available for abortion. So his estimate is that there are 2 million people who would have been aborted had it not been for the Hyde Amendment, which is a pretty powerful statistic. In a sense, this makes the Hyde Amendment really the single most important pro-life legislative achievement of the entire history of post-Roe v. Wade America. Now, it was kind of a consensus in American politics between Republicans and Democrats that most Democrats, or many Democrats anyway, supported the Hyde Amendment. Their abortion position was, while I support a woman's right to choose, while I support legalized abortion, while I support Roe v. Wade, I nevertheless don't support making the taxpayer pay for it. So therefore, I will endorse the Hyde Amendment. This mindset was so widespread that even the California legislature tried to pass a Hyde Amendment, but it was railroaded by our ultra-liberal activist California State Supreme Court that thought it was unconstitutional for the state to stop funding abortion once women had started to rely on it, which is it was an absurd decision by the California State Supreme Court. Just the notion that the state can choose to fund something, but then can't change its mind and decide not to fund this one certain healthcare procedure. So California was nonsensical, but nevertheless, Republicans and Democrats largely supported the Hyde Amendment. And Joe Biden himself, interestingly, supported the Hyde Amendment for its since it was introduced in the Senate in 1976. And remember, Joe Biden was first elected to the Senate, I believe, in 1976. So his whole career as a U.S. Senator, from 1976 through January of 2009, Joe Biden supported the Hyde Amendment. For his 8 years in office as vice president, Joe Biden supported the Hyde Amendment. And then something weird happened in the year 2019. In 2019, in the heat of the Democratic primaries, Joe Biden was asked, hey, are you going to try and get rid of the Hyde Amendment? And Biden, clearly not realizing what the Hyde Amendment, not remembering what the Hyde Amendment was, or not understanding what the guy was asking him, said, oh yeah, we definitely need to get rid of the Hyde Amendment. This is Joe Biden, after all. He's not above an occasional mix-up, an occasional speaking whoops-a-daisy. So Biden said, oh yeah, we got to get rid of that Hyde Amendment. And everyone's like, whoa, Joe Biden's changing his view on the Hyde Amendment? He's been in favor of the Hyde Amendment for 40 years. He's all of a sudden now opposed to the Hyde Amendment? What's going on? Biden then realized he made a mistake and sent out some of his press flunkies to various news shows to say, no, Mr. Biden has not changed his views on the Hyde Amendment. Mr. Biden does not support federal funding for abortion. Mr. Biden maintains this position due to his long-standing Catholic beliefs. These are his principles, blah, 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 blah. The next day, Within 24 hours, Mr. Biden got so much flack from Democrat activists, from left-wing activists, that he then changed his position. So over the course of like 2 or 3 days in the summer of 2019, Joe Biden went from accidentally saying he opposed the Hyde Amendment because he didn't understand a question to saying, no, I still support the Hyde Amendment. I've supported the Hyde Amendment for 40 years. It's because of my deep, religious convictions as a Roman Catholic. And then immediately the next day proceeded to change his 40-year position on the Hyde Amendment. And that's one of the significant changes that's happened in Democratic Party politics over the last really 8 years or so. 2016 was the first time that the Democratic Party platform included as a platform position the notion that the Democratic Party was opposed to the Hyde Amendment. That was introduced in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. Hillary was the first presidential candidate ever to oppose the Hyde Amendment. And we can see what's at stake here. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars flowing through the Medicaid program to pay for abortion. And if you think Planned Parenthood gets a lot of money in federal funding now, just wait. Just wait. Planned Parenthood already gets the bulk of its federal funding, something like $450 million per year. The bulk of Planned Parenthood's federal funding comes from Medicaid. And it's chiefly now it comes from Medicaid, but it's not to reimburse directly their abortion services. The Medicaid money that Planned Parenthood receives is paying for all of their non-abortion services. So, cancer screenings or birth control or, whatever other services Planned Parenthood does, that's what Medicaid dollars are paying for. But guess what? Abortion is their most profitable service. That's the service that they can bill the most money to insurance for. That provides them with more revenue than all of their other services. Okay, trust me, as someone, as we said in the first segment with Linda, as someone right now who's setting up a pro-life prenatal clinic, I'm keenly aware of how abortion makes good business sense when you're trying to start a prenatal and reproductive health care clinic. Okay, that it's clearly the thing that makes Planned Parenthood clinics viable as a business enterprise. So if you want Planned Parenthood to receive maybe double what they're receiving now, maybe $1 billion in federal funding a year rather than $450 million, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's going to result in a lot more money to Planned Parenthood, and it's going to result in a lot of our taxpayer dollars directly being spent to reimburse for abortions, for chemical abortions, for surgical abortions all over the United States. That's what we're talking about here. And beyond that, we could see even direct grants. Here in California, let's note, California set up the whole program to allow the distribution of medication abortion on CSU and UC campuses. In that bill, the California legislature provided for the fund that is going to pay for that whole service on the CSU and UC campuses. It allows that fund to receive federal dollars in the event that the federal government were to change its position on federal abortion funding. So we could see grants going to pay for abortion from all kinds of different sources. We could see all kinds of things that will directly help fund abortion. And not just, obviously any money to Planned Parenthood. Look, money is fungible. If I have $20 in my pocket and my mom says, I'm giving you this $20 bill, don't use it to go to the movies. And I say, oh, okay, well, I'll take that $20 bill and not use it for the movies and use the $20 bill that was in my pocket to go to the movie. Money is fungible. If I give you a bunch of money for some things, it frees up your resources to do other things. But this is just going to result in way more money to Planned Parenthood, way more money to abortion providers, and way more, I think, likely, children being killed through abortion with our taxpayer dollars. To close out the show, the pro-life case against Anthony Fauci. Next on Right to Life Radio. Thank you all so much for listening to Right to Life Radio. All right, I'm going to wade into some controversial waters here. Now, we at Right to Life Central California, as a nonprofit that focuses on some things, I try to avoid issue creep. I try to just talk about the things that we talk about. Abortion, physician-assisted suicide, end-of-life issues. I try not to stray into, Right to Life Radio is not a general, conservative talk show. In fact, we highly welcome ultra-liberals even, as long as they're pro-life. Now, if you want a general talk show, you can listen to the John Girardi Show, 6 to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. But that's not what Right to Life Radio is. We're a show that focuses on certain specific issues. And so you might think that this is going off on a tangent, but I promise it is not. I'm going to talk about Anthony Fauci. Now, and not just Anthony Fauci, but also Dr. Francis Collins, and I'm going to connect the two. Now, these two guys have gotten into a little bit of hot water lately. Dr. Fauci is the director of NIAID, which basically oversees a lot of research grants and funding for studying various kinds of diseases, viruses, etc. And Dr. Fauci has been, in many ways, sort of the public face of the government response to coronavirus. Dr. Francis Collins is technically Anthony Fauci's boss. He has been a little bit less of a high profile during the coronavirus case, but Francis Collins is in charge of the National Institutes of Health. And I have long said that the single biggest mistake, the one general bad thing that President Trump did when it comes to abortion-related issues, there were some missed opportunities in the Trump administration, certainly, but the one thing that he did that was frankly bad was leaving Francis Collins in charge of the National Institutes of Health. Francis Collins is super pro-choice. Francis Collins was appointed by Barack Obama. So he was an Obama administration holdover that President Trump allowed to remain in office. And President Obama appointed him in no small part because Dr. Collins was such a fierce advocate for embryo-destructive stem cell research. National Institutes of Health and NIAID, the division of it that Dr. Fauci runs, their chief role within the federal government is to distribute some, I believe it's $80 billion per year approximately, of federal funds for research grants. Research grants at universities all over the United States, research institutions all over the United States, and even some grants or sub-grants that go to different parts of the world. There's one grant that's been the subject of some scrutiny lately that went to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and that was studying coronaviruses from bats. And there were a few people from that lab who got sick with a weird flu-type illness sometime around October of 2019. Anyway, that's a different topic for a different day. Anyway, what we've seen lately with Dr. Fauci has sort of tried to present himself as sort of a neutral arbiter, not a political actor. He has served under several presidents. He's been at his position at NIAID since 1984 and has served under Reagan, Bush 41, Bill Clinton, Bush 43, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and now Joe Biden. And yet, one of the things President Trump talked about was this notion of the swamp, this notion that there are career officials of the federal government who are very left-wing, who they're career officials, they're not political appointees, and they're very left-wing, and they wind up stymieing Republican administrations when they come into power. Well, since President Trump has left office, President Biden, as most of you know, has started a lot of initiatives through executive action that are really bad, and that are going to result in abortion funding worldwide. The repeal of the Mexico City policy, the removal of certain restrictions on fetal tissue research using the body parts of aborted children in research. And it has been Dr. Fauci who has had numerous public comments praising the Biden administration for reinstating these policies. It has been Dr. Fauci who has said, well, I'm sure that they followed guidelines. When he was pressed by a member of Congress about, are they reinstating some of these research grants that were being used, in which the Trump administration stopped, research grants to take human fetal tissue from the scalps of aborted fetuses to try to graft them onto the bodies of lab rats, basically trying to create some kind of human rat chimera experiment. And Dr. Fauci said, oh, well, no, I'm sure this is being done all fine and legally and in accordance with ethical standards. So, for those reasons, I'm pretty much ready to, not literally, but figuratively, load Dr. Fauci into a cannon and fire him into the sun. And I will correct my former statement that the worst mistake Trump made was not firing Dr. Francis Collins to say the worst mistake Trump made was not firing Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci. That'll do it for Right to Life Radio. We'll see you next week. See you later.